flog me later.
Well, no flogging today. Today's a non-flogging day. All right. Just had to get the microphone there working. All right. All right. So Methuselah had called his name Noah, and then verse 15. And the child grew up and was weaned, and he went in the ways of his father Methuselah, perfect and upright with God. And the sons of men departed from the ways of the Lord in those days, as they multiplied upon the face of the earth with sons and daughters. And they taught one another their evil practices and continued sinning against the Lord. Verse 17. And every man made unto himself a god, and they robbed and plundered every man his neighbor and as well as his relative, and they corrupted the earth, and the earth was filled with violence. And their judges and rulers went to the daughters of men and took their wives by force from their husbands, according to their choice. And the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth, here's the point, the beasts of the air and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals, one species with another, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth, and it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth, all men and all animals, except for 8 people. Verse 19, and the Lord said, I will blot out man that I created from the face of the earth, yea, from the man to the birds of the air, together with cattle and beasts that are in the field, for I repent that I made them. And again, here's the point. Verse 20, I love this point. And all men who walked in the ways of the Lord died in those days before the Lord brought the evil upon man, which he had declared, for this was of the Lord, that they should not see evil, which the Lord spoke of concerning the sons of men. Can you say rapture? That's exactly what that is. That is, his pattern is, I will take you out because you are my own and I love you and I will take care of you. And so we don't have to worry about the things, again, what did Fauci call it? Gain of function, mixing animals. He's very, very blunt about this. It's like, this is nothing new. This was in Jasher. But I do see the pattern that God's going to rescue us. That's awesome. I think that's a great foreshadowing that we can look back to. And then finally, verse 21 of Jasher 14. And Noah found grace in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord chose him and his children to raise up seed from them upon the face of the whole earth. And so that's the end of Jasher. So Noah was 480 years old when God gave the limit of 120 years on mankind. So food for thought here. 120 plus 480 equals 600 years. So symbolizing the 6,000 years and then the 1,000 year reign of Christ. I don't know. Food for thought. But moving on here, Marianne thankfully sent a video link out a few days ago. And it was from 2001, and it was evidently a few weeks before 9/11. And on it, this lady goes through NASA's own website. And there's a web page in there. And it talked in detail about legally creating what's known as smart dust, which would, and they spell this out, which would create illnesses and diseases. And then I remembered finally back into 2010, I remembered watching a Canadian farmer on YouTube, and he was talking about his plants and how they weren't acting right. And so he was a scientist, and he examined them, and he saw this self-assembling dust and how it was damaging the crops and the plants. So I totally forgot about that until Mary Ann had sent that out. And so my point is that this intentional assault on humanity, this has been going on for a while. This has been going on for a while. This isn't something new. It's far beyond just the Bill Gates and abortion is the way for everything to depopulate. The proof's out there if we'll look for it. And then Netanyahu, this was really, what? He said a couple days ago that Israel was just a guinea pig for Pfizer's vaccines. This is what he said. But he didn't say it with any remorse. He wasn't even sad. He was happy that he took the database that Israel had. 98% of people were all tracked with their data card. He goes, we just wanted to be the first to help out. Israel had the highest bad reactions to the vaccines, the highest by far. So was that supposed to be good? I don't think so. And so, of course, we've seen what's happening here in the U.S. But what grieves me most of all is that the data, and this was just from a couple months ago, the churches were still accounting for foreign material insertions a day. Churches. And that grieves me because we have Revelation 18:23, which tells us that the whole world will be deceived by their sorceries, which is pharmakia, the Greek word pharmakia. So it grieves me because that's in the Bible. Revelation 18:23, it's so clear. So how can a church continue to do this? I don't understand that. I leave that for your further study. And so again, here on the prophecy update, there's another disturbing fact. Young people claiming disability, specifically after FMIs, foreign matter insertions, disability is up 400%. Just specifically young people claiming disability because of FMIs. We call them vaccine injury. And so, just like cancer, diabetes, all these things, they are just, numbers are through the roof. And I've got a friend who's a mortician, busy as all get out, way more than he's ever been. And then lastly, on Facebook, there's actually a new Facebook page called Died Suddenly. I don't know if you saw that. There's a movie that came out by the same title. And anyway, this new Facebook page, if you go on there, you'll see people posting, hey, I got vaccinated on there. And they're happy, hey, I did this. And then there's another page right next to it, another screenshot of them passing, all within an 18-month window. And you scroll, and you scroll, and you scroll, and you scroll. You see where I'm going. It just scrolls and scrolls and scrolls. And so the evidence is out there, and unfortunately, the restrictions that they're putting on people seem to be increasing. But one thing to remember, God. I just read you Jasher. He's coming. We've already won. We're walking through this. He is bringing us through this, no matter how diabolical it seems to be getting. And so we've won the victory. We have it because of his finished work. It isn't anything I've done or you've done. And God said he's going to do that. They, meaning the world, is doing this all just before he returns. So we see the pattern in Jasher. He's coming. He's coming. He's coming. And then we see the references when we look into Revelation of what those signs are. And so we know he's close. So my point here is keep pressing in. This is our hour to fulfill all the good works which God has planned for each of us to do before the foundation of the world, and to help those who are lost, help those people who are lost, and those who are shrinking back, those who are in fear. So let's go ahead and we're going to begin with 1 Kings chapter 10. And we have a section header which reads, The Queen of Sheba's Praise of Solomon. And you guys remember who Queen of Sheba was. It says, verse number 1, Now when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. So I thought that was interesting. It doesn't stop with the fame of Solomon being what she heard, but what she also heard was concerning the name of the Lord. So it wasn't just that, oh, hey, Solomon's this really wise guy. I think I'll go check him out, find out what he really knows. It was Yahweh. It was the name of the Lord that was that compelling piece. So the Septuagint states it this way. That's the original Greek. And the Queen of Sheba heard the name of the Lord, the name of Solomon, and the name of the Lord, and she came to try him with riddles. So this is actually one of the very, very few times I'll take the New King James Version over the Septuagint because we know better that Solomon's fame came from the power of God's name. It wasn't because Solomon was so great. Solomon was gifted that. And it was only gifted that because David told him to ask for wisdom. And as we saw last week, Solomon forgot to ask for the other part of it, which was a heart after God, which is why he strayed so predominantly. But I just wanted to point that out to you of the name of God being one of the reasons that she came. So verse 2, she came to Jerusalem with a very great company, with camels that bore spices, very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she spoke with him all about that was on her heart. So Queen of Sheba travels a really long way to see for herself if Solomon was all that the marketing and Old Testament commercials made him out to be. And so she doesn't come empty-handed. She's royalty. She's a queen. And she's kind of real royalty versus visiting royalty. So verse 3, now so Solomon answered all of her questions. There was nothing so difficult for the king that he could not explain it to her. And verse 4, and when the queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he built, the food on his table, and listen to this list. I want you to pay attention to the list. The food on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters, and their apparel, his cupbearers, and his entryway by which he went up into the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. Again, I like the New King James Version of that. For that last line, there was no more spirit in her. So I find these 3 verses really telling as to what the Queen of Sheba was really interested in. Order, processes, formality, dress, architecture. I don't think she cared too much about his wealth. I mean, we'll see here that she brought a bundle of money, 120 talents, for roughly well over $4 million. So it wasn't like, oh, wow, you got money. I mean, she was bringing a ton herself. So if we look at what she was interested in, that's something that I can say of my wife and women in general. They have much more appreciation and attention to these things, which is why when we're married, it's such a great combination of the things I'm lacking. She obviously more than makes up for. And so why I'm so amazed is those last 7 words of verse 5. There was no more spirit in her. So she had brought tons of gifts. She had asked the hard questions. Even with what she had a leaning to, she saw the processes and the dress of the cupbearers and the dress of the waiters. And so God's gifts to Solomon outweighed her own comprehension of what ideal must have looked like. It was like, wow, you've got everything. I mean, it's in order and you've got a lot of it. Verse 6. Then she said to the king, it is a true report, which I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. I thought that was telling. What's my favorite phrase? Words matter. When I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. Verse 7, however, I did not believe the words until I came and saw it with my own eyes, and indeed the half was not told to me. Your wisdom and prosperity exceed the fame of which I heard. Happy are your men, and happy are these your servants, who stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. And so she's gushing on and on about Solomon here. But we know that God supplied Solomon that wisdom alone. Think of it this way. What if David had never said to Solomon, hey, if God ever talks to you, ask for wisdom? If that instruction hadn't been there, would Solomon have asked for wisdom? Well, as we know that the story is in the Bible now, God would have made a way. But let's stop for a second. I want you to look back at the Septuagint's rendering of verse 8. And so you could tell me if you see what the difference is. So in 10:8, with the King James Version, to read it again, happy are your men, and happy are these your servants, who stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. That's New King James Version. Now the Septuagint, blessed are your wives. Didn't catch that from the New King James Version. Blessed are thy wives, blessed are thy servants, who stand before thee continually and who hear all thy wisdom. So again, in the New King James Version, the translators tell us that happy are Solomon's men. And the Septuagint starts off with, hey, blessed are your wives. So I think that's telling. I mean, the original text indicates to me a possibility of two things. One, that the number of Solomon's wives at that point wasn't minimal. And so we've been talking about the abundance here. She's seen the food, and she's seen the money, and she's seen the servants, and everything. And I leave that for your further study because she first references his wives. But given the 1,000 female additions to Solomon's family as either a wife or a concubine, I see the Queen of Sheba looking around and seeing a lot of women in queen royal attire. And so she's like seeing them and going, wow, blessed are your wives. I'm seeing, so it's not just an individual or two. That's one suggestion I'm making to you. And the second point being is that she's obviously a woman. She assumed that Solomon's wisdom, that his amazing wisdom translated also into truly caring for each of his wives, as any wife would love to be cared for. But the fact again is that Solomon had built so many false little g god altars to his wives and all of their little g gods to the sun, moon, and stars. And this shows us that while he may have physically loved them, he didn't lead them in the ways of God. And so how blessed were they? How blessed were they? Verse 9, Blessed be the Lord your God, who delighted in you, setting you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord has loved Israel forever, therefore he made you king to do justice and righteousness. And so now what we see in our comments here in verse 9 again at this time is that while Solomon knew and performed a lot of justice, there was a growing gap. There's a growing gap there. So yeah, he had a lot of wealth, had a lot of things, but it was his personal and Yahweh-centric righteousness which were being diluted. His personal accountability as a king, and we saw, again, I said this a million times, Solomon tried to change one word in the Hebrew Torah, the yod, to make it seem like he could have multiple wives. And you see what it did for him. It totally destroyed him because he wasn't focused on the Lord. So verse 10, and this is where we get the money figure from the Queen of Sheba. Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, spices in great quantity, and precious stones. And there never again came such an abundance of spices as the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. So we've talked about 120 talents and how much a talent of gold was. So it depended on where you were and the year and location of exactly how much you would get for a talent, but at a bare minimum, and we're talking about she's bringing him $2 million to ask him some questions. But I want you to notice that the real showstopper, or highlight, if you will, was that she brought him a boatload of possibly super rare spices. And I doubt any visiting king, if they'd come along, would have said, hey, I've got some spices for you, Solomon. I don't think that would have been, maybe weapons or racing camels, perhaps, trading cards, whatever a guy thing might have been. Anyway, verse 11. Also the ships of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, brought great quantities of almug, also translated algum, wood and precious stones from Ophir. Verse 12, and the king made steps of the almug wood for the house of the Lord, and for the king's house also harps and stringed instruments for singers. There never again came such almug wood, nor has the like been seen to this day. Now it's important to point out that the city of Ophir hasn't been definitively located. So you can say, okay, this is where this was, and so there's a question as to what this wood actually was. Many have suggested it was like a juniper tree. Some have suggested it was like sandalwood. And if we look at the what he used on verse 12, and the king made steps of the almug wood for the house of the Lord. Two commentators, biblical commentators, Carl Friedrich Kiel and Franz Delitzsch, suggest that we should think of these steps with banisters to make sense of the text. Banisters and the steps going up. Now, verse 13. Now, King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all that she desired, whatever she asked, besides what Solomon had given her according to the royal generosity. It's kind of an undefined, vague thing, but he gave her some stuff. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. So, I don't know. Pride's a pretty interesting beast. I don't know if dignitaries tried to outgive each other. I don't know if she brought $4 million and went home with $8 million. I'll leave that to your study. But the next section header, speaking of money, is Solomon's great wealth. Verse 14. The gold that came to Solomon, thank you, take a drink. The gold that came to Solomon yearly, get this number, 666 talents of gold. Again, really interesting number there. I probably would have given him a discount just to get away from that number. I'll just do 660. Yeah, you're good. Don't worry about it. Verse 15, continuing. Besides that, from the traveling merchants and from the income of the traders, from all the kings of Arabia and from the governors of the country. And King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. So here's an interesting fact. It's said that each of those shields with that many shekels of gold would have been worth $40,000 today. Just one shield. Verse 17. He also made 300 shields of hammered gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. The king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. And so it's said that a mina was a Greek monetary unit worth about 100 denarii, or about 4 months' wages for the average worker, based on a 6-day, not a 5-day, a 6-day work week. So 3 minas then would have been a year's worth of wages in gold for a shield, just one. So that sounds really gaudy and ineffective and worthless or wasteful. But moving on. What I do want to point out is that the text is absent of us seeing God saying, Solomon, make these shields and put lots of gold in them. We don't see that. That's a white space. So I think to myself back on this Shield of Faith sermon that we had on Sunday, and I think to myself, he could have been studying the Torah and building his own shield of faith and not the little g God altars of 1,000 different wives, much more so than making these bragging statements of these huge shields worth probably hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. All right, now verses 18 through 23. These are the series of wealth statements, so we're just going to read through them. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had 6 steps, and on the top of the throne was round at the back. There were armrests on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the armrests. 12 lions stood there, one on each side of the 6 steps, and nothing like this had been made for any other kingdom. Verse 21. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Not one of them was silver, for this was accounted as nothing in the days of Solomon. So with that fact, Solomon's lust here for wealth, again, gathering and hoarding and making displays such as these shields. I don't know how many of you have watched Lord of the Rings movies with Thor and Oakenshield, but whenever he's under the mountain, he starts to seal the gold. The lust consumes him for all that money. And so it proceeds to do some dumb things. He betrays his own people. And my point is, by Solomon choosing to make all these false God, little g God altars for his foreign wives, Solomon betrays his own people. He was supposed to be leading them in the ways of Yahweh. And so, like we talked about on Sunday, the fruits of the flesh are being widely displayed here by Solomon as to his wealth, and then his number of wives just keep growing. Verse 22. For the king had merchant ships at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the merchant ships came, bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and monkeys. So King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. So I'll again point out, riches and wisdom, that's what he had. But the Pharisees knew of the Torah, the Talmud, the Mishnah. You could take, or they could take, not me, they could take a needle and put it through the parchments of the first 5 books of the Bible, and when told what the first word was, they had to know what the subsequent pages, what word it was going through. That's how much or how well they knew the words. So their spiritual wisdom, however, the knowledge and understanding, was extremely limited, very limited. And how do we know that? They rejected Christ. They put him on the cross. But that was also God's plan. So when we look at the Pharisees' knowledge, we look at Solomon's knowledge, comparatively, when you leave the spiritual aspect out of it, then it's a strikeout. It's game over. You have abandoned your first love. And that's a verse we see in the Bible which reminds us to never abandon our first love in Jesus. So back to the text here. For all of Solomon's worldly riches and wisdom, none of it helped him stay on course with Yahweh, with God. It became a great snare for him, just like thorn, oak, and shield. And it was, as we read in Matthew 16, 24 through 26, if a man gain the whole world but lose his soul, can't argue that. Let's actually read the passage here, because we were talking about this on Sunday as well. Matthew 16, 24 through 26. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? So as morally and spiritually bankrupt as the Pharisees were, Solomon was right there mirroring that void. So that's why I ask myself, and I ask you as well, do you grade your fruits regularly? If Solomon had paid attention to that, then he could easily do that litmus test side by side going, wow, I'm doing a lot of fruits of the flesh here. Maybe I should change something. And so obstacles like pride and personal opinion in Solomon created these rotten examples. And so we don't want those in our own walk, is what I'm saying. So back to the text here. 666 talents of gold just in tribute payments alone. You totally forget any dependence on Yahweh, on God. And that's the problem with wealth even today for any of us, for even any materials that we have. Dependence on them, that could be taken away in an instant, absolutely wiped out. And so this money did create some rotten fruit in Solomon and in anyone who is going to follow material wealth versus spiritual. And so his ratio of giving was very little to Yahweh, a lot to shields and whatever he wanted to do, and then his wives got everything else. And that's a real problem. The instruction we receive in the New Testament from Christ himself is Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters, for he will either hate one and love the other, or he'll be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, or money, or pride, or self, or really anything else. So that's the commandment. Just serve God. Just focus on God. And so, unfortunately, this is the instruction that Solomon stumbles at and fails in the flesh. Great wisdom, but very low in the spiritual maturity level. So again, whatever hobby or like or love or interest that we have, that we find ourselves spending time with, we need to surrender that to God. I told you, I think it was Sunday, for those who were with us, of my, I put my phone down somewhere, probably in the bathroom. A Real Racing 3, a game I had played on my phone. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And I didn't think too much of it, but I got to the end of like the second week of it. And it was like, congratulations, Mr. Jozak. You have spent like 17 or 20 hours on it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a ton of time to. And so again, likes, loves, interests, even things like, well, I really like to do that. That's 17 hours I could have been studying. That's the way I look at it. I'm speaking to this guy. All right. So we have to look at things as dispensable and disposable and secondary compared to our love and our study of Christ. So consequently, as we already know, what Solomon chose was wealth and women over the God who had blessed him with everything in the first place. And again, as I mentioned, it was because David had instructed him. So on to verse 24. Now, all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. So to reiterate here, Solomon asked for wisdom, but again, not that heart after God. So when we're looking at verse 24 here again, now all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart, but God wasn't in his heart. he could do the going through the motions. Hey, priests, do your priestly stuff, do some sacrifices. Yeah, I'll fund it, no issues. But he wasn't a poster child for us to follow. And again, we see so many times that if you were in your child's class at Sunday school, oh, Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived. But when you actually dig into it, he actually was pretty stupid. Whenever any of us, self-included, when we put Yahweh, when we put the Lord our God secondary in any way, shape, or form, we are courting danger. That's just a simple fact. And so verses 25 through 29, these tell us of the vast yearly payments that were brought to Solomon, so nothing random. I want you to notice that. These payments weren't random. They were a set rate and a set amount every year. So there was no worry for Solomon about paying people or bill collectors. And we'll start with verse 25. Each man brought his present, articles of silver and gold, garments, armor, spices, horses, and mules at a set rate year by year. And Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. And the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones. Can you imagine that? I grew up in the country, and so we would get gravel poured in our driveway. And we would go through it, and we'd see little fossils in the gravel. And it was like, as a kid, you're looking at your driveway going, wow, this is an endless amount of gravel. I mean, I'll be doing this forever. And yet, Solomon had made silver as common as stones, as these rocks. It says, then he made cedar trees as abundant as the sycamores which are in the lowland. and Solomon had horses imported from Egypt and Kiev, K-E-V-E-H, Keveh. And the king's merchants bought them in Keveh at a current price. Now a chariot that was imported from Egypt cost 600 shekels of silver, and a horse 150, which is kind of funny. 600 shekels of silver. So I might as well go pick up 600 stones and take them over because silver's as common as stones. It's not a big deal. So he's buying chariots and stuff. It's, the cost really isn't there. But what I want you to look at is the second part of that verse. It says, and thus through their agents, they exported them, to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. It's like, what? So the last part of verse 29 here sounds a little confusing to me. I'll tell you why. So we get the cost of the chariot and the cost of the horse, but Solomon's exporting these, maybe even marking them up, making a profit on it like he even needed to. But he's marking them to the Hittites and the kings of Syria. So let's go back a little bit. Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 3. This is God saying, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites all were clearly labeled as enemies of God. 7 nations larger and stronger than you, and when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you, and you have defeated them, then you must utterly destroy them. Make no treaty with them, and show them no mercy. So Solomon, what the heck are you doing? You're selling them war weapons? You're so greedy for gain that the enemies of God that you are told, these are sworn enemies of God, scorched earth, men, women, children, beasts, kill everything. Here he is selling, making a profit off of it. And so not just any enemy, like I pointed out, but one of the 7 that God says, nothing, leave nothing. And so asking for a friend, why'd you do it, Solomon? Why was it so important to do that? And so we go back to the study on Sunday, the fruits of the flesh. Solomon's pride. Pride is a wicked thing when it's left unchained. And there's greed and self-interest and so much more that's outside of God's character, outside of God's commands. And so no wonder Solomon never got the blessing of God at longer life. He died sooner than his dad did. And so what was the condition? If you exclusively follow me, Solomon. And so there's no shortage of no shortage of pitfalls that the flesh causes us to fall into. So study, bend the knee, sacrifice, fellowship. This is what we've been talking about for the last several weeks about the fruits of the Spirit versus these fruits of the flesh in a side-by-side comparison. And so when we take Solomon's actions and many worldly, if not all the worldly things, on the surface, they look wise, they look smart, they look good, they look valuable. Oh, okay, yeah. And that's why the Queen of Sheba looked at him and said, wow, if you're this smart, you got to be taking care of your wives really great. I mean, I bet they love you. Well, define love. Love, according to God, would have been teaching them in the way of him. And Solomon didn't do that. And so, the only measurement that matters is this, spiritually. What was the spiritual level? So minimize the things of this world to the Solomons, to us all, and elevate our love and devotion of Christ to the highest. So I know we're short here on content for today. I actually went through a lot faster than I thought I was going to go. But I want you to see there that Solomon had this, he had the cleanest and the biggest and the greatest slate. When you talk about, well, I grew up here and I grew up there and this happened to me and that happened to me. Solomon had David as a dad. Solomon had every reason to be like, oh yeah, my dad messed up. I don't want that. I don't want that to happen to me. And he had to go through a lot. He had every pattern to follow for the right thing. But instead, he only heard half of what his dad said. Ask for wisdom and a heart after the Lord. And of the two, I'll take the heart after the Lord because that solves everything. I mean, if I have a heart after the Lord, then the Lord will give me wisdom. If I just ask for wisdom, again, we talked about this before. You can have wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and skill, but they're all separate. If I just have wisdom but no knowledge, then I know some things, but I have no way to apply them. I don't know. If I have knowledge, then I have wisdom, and I can apply in some things, but if I don't do it regularly, if I don't do it correctly and with the right heart space, it too is worthless. But if I have wisdom and knowledge and God gives me understanding, it's the why. This is the why of this wisdom, and this is how I want you to use it, and here's how it's going to help you. And then lastly, skill. The more frequently I do that, then the more comfortable I feel in his word, and I grab his word, and I cling it to my heart, and it's like, thank you for talking to me, Lord. Thank you for speaking to me. That's well beyond just wisdom. And so again, I encourage you, each and every one of you, to study and to press in. I'll go ahead and pray here, and then if you have any questions, we'll do that. Again, it was didn't expect to go through it that quickly, but let's go ahead and pray. Father God, I just come before you thankful for this access into your presence. I thank you that you know the way that we take, and that if we'll ask for wisdom, that's the first block. If we'll ask for wisdom, you'll give it to us. So, Lord, I just pray for everyone, most of all myself, to have a humbled heart, a contrite heart, a broken heart, that wants to hear your wisdom, to know how to apply it with knowledge, to get understanding as to how it helps and why it helps, and then to pursue you daily, day after day after day, being the blessing to others as they are to us. Father, dismiss us with your blessing, and again, just strip away any and all foolishness that was spoken. Lord, just seal your truth to our hearts. And we pray this in your mighty, mighty name. Amen and amen.